Good viewer, you are watching Xirtus. This is because Xirtus makes you feel good, makes you feel fulfilled. You are enjoying this. You will continue to watch Xirtus for a long time to come. You want to subscribe to Xirtus, and you will. You will like and subscribe and share. You will tell your friends. Tell your friends about Xirtus. Your friends will come to like Xirtus, much as you are liking this right now, as we speak. Thank you for subscribing to Xirtus. See, that was easy.
I'll take it. So welcome to the Latterwave show. No, I'm not sure exactly like how long the intro is supposed to be, but sometimes I just like hearing that song. Latter Day Chad's here with us after a sunny day of selling solar. I think that.
Yes, sir. Yeah,
that
that's exactly what I do. Just get yelled at people for soliciting all day.
It's a fun alliterism. And then LDS Memes 8. What's up, bro? How's it going?
Yes, it's been going good. I'm really glad to be here to hear what Chad has to say.
Yeah, you know what I was just thinking about. Similarly, I was like, you know what? I was like, what are we going to talk about? And Chad's like, I don't know. Do you want to talk about how like maybe how temples are interdimensional gateways? I was like, yes, so much. Yes. I don't know. I was just right. Because cool. I've been thinking about that too a lot of the time. This idea of like we have a kind of a veil between materialism and energy and reality, and it's just exactly, you know, when they talk about harmonics, even you go to like Notre Dame and you see these ancient temples and things, and they have this sacred geometry, which is this kind of thing you'll notice, especially with modern temples, is it's all about perfect geometry and how it's built. And maybe there's something even to like the harmonics of form and shape, like Solomon building the temple. So temples and the idea of the uncut stone and the altar and, you know, all these things, like what is it that you think a temple is, and like what is, you know, what do you mean by all that?
Well, it got me thinking about that for two things. One, conference on Sunday, which we can talk about a little bit later, but also the fact that for a while during the eclipse in Ohio, I actually planned on going to the Columbus temple. I was going to go to Kirtland or Columbus. It was closed, so I couldn't actually go inside that day. Because throughout cultures, that is what the temple symbolizes. Everything that we do inside the temples, whether it be baptisms for the dead or the endowment, it is something that is symbolic of passing through the veil. The endowment especially is about, passing through the veil, the temple ceremonies, going into the presence of God, entering into the presence of the tree of life, right? So we have that. So I went to the temple for the eclipse, which an eclipse, if symbolizes the same sort of thing. And it's actually funny. I ran into Wayne May there, Heartland legend. I got this
Awesome.
this autographed Book of Mormon from him, actually.
What?
Right?
What?
Signed by Wayne May. Look at that.
Oh,
Took a
man.
picture with him too. And I ran into
Cool,
Stick
yeah.
of Joseph there, Hayden and Paul from Stick of Joseph. And it's funny because I was talking
at the temple during the eclipse.
Yeah, I just, I felt like I had to go there. I just so happened to run into those guys.
That
They're
is
doing a
crazy.
mound
Craziest
tour
thing.
of the Hopewell Mounds where they found all the Israelite artifacts and stuff.
Yeah.
So I just went there. It's funny. I was talking about Dave Butler, the author of Plain and Precious Things. That's the book talking about the Deuteronomist reforms, First Temple Judaism in the context of the Book of Mormon, of course, because they take place in the same time period and there's a lot of connections there. But so I'm talking about that, and then Hayden Paul from Stick of Joseph comes up. He's like, I didn't recognize him at first. He's like, "Oh, Dave Butler, did you see the interview we did with him?" I was like, "The interview?" And I was like, "Oh," I didn't even realize. So yeah, I got to watch the eclipse with those guys. It was pretty cool.
Wow.
But back onto the topic of the temple, why is it that I went there? Why is it that I stood in the circle in front of the temple during the eclipse? Because symbolically, that is what the temple is, right? And we've talked a lot on here about visionary men and how in the world in general, religiously, that is what we need more of. We need more people who are open to God, who are open to visionary things. In fact, just barely, I came back so late because I was at a meeting for work, a sales meeting, and I was talking to this guy. He actually knew about the Deuteronomist reforms and stuff, and I was like going on about the stuff because he was asking me questions about Mormonism or whatever, and people were surprised, like, "You're like really smart. Did you like go to some school or something?" I'm like, "No, dude, God just revealed it to me in a dream." But like, I mean, as much as I can joke about that, there is truth to that because that's how Joseph Smith described revelation as intelligence flowing into you from an outside source, right? Whether it's in the form of a voice, in the form of visions. In the temple, when they dedicate a temple, that is specifically a place. That's why you can do tours before it's dedicated, but afterwards you need to be worthy. You need a temple recommend to go inside because it is a place where the veil is thinned, right? And as I've said on here multiple times before, I know multiple people who I can confirm they've had crazy things happen in the temple. They've had, visions, they've had visitations from angels that only them and another person can see that person that's talking to them, but other people in the temple don't see what's going on. And I think that really does go back to the theme of this last conference where, things are getting a little spicy in the world, to say the least. And I remember my mom sending me a link explaining a story that before conference, President Oaks showed up to a random church building and said that different members of the Quorum of the Apostles were prompted and received revelation to talk about a specific thing. And if you know what was talked about at conference, it was very subtle because I'm going to be honest, many members of the Utah church are just very ignorant. Like they refuse to see things the way Joseph Smith taught them. They refuse to look at that deeper doctrine, and they'll get on your case about that stuff, even though it's all doctrinal. Bruce R. McConkie talks about all this stuff as well. All the prophets have talked about it. And so these things are very subtle, but to those of us that really understand, it was very clear what they were talking about at conference when they say that the heavens are not closed, angels are still among us. When they quote Doctrine and Covenants 93, which is one of the greatest, most brilliant scriptures of all time, where it talks about intelligence or consciousness being eternal, when Jesus Christ says to Joseph Smith in it that all those who forsake their sins and come towards him will see my face and know that I am, right? And there's a little bit of meaning there. Knowing that I am is the name of Jehovah. But it's very similar to the way he said, before Abraham was, I am, and that I am the true light of the lighteth every man that cometh into the world, and that I am in the Father, and the Father in me, and the Father and I are one. The Father, because he gave me his fullness, and the Son, because I dwelt in the world and made flesh my tabernacle and dwelt among the sons of men. So he's talking about the oneness with the Father, which is sort of different from the Nicene Trinity, but it's really explaining that there. But what is he saying when he says that they will see my face and know that I am? That is a doctrine that's not widely taught, but it's on the LDS website. The doctrine of the two comforters, right? Or the calling an election, I believe it is. But basically, the idea is that certain people, the more worthy you are, the more faith you have, the more you will begin to receive revelation. In the temple, that is a place that is set apart where the veil between worlds is thinned. And I can confirm that these things are real because I've been pulled aside by people who have said that they were prompted to talk to me about these things and to guide me in this direction. And the truth is that Joseph Smith taught, and the Book of Mormon makes it very clear with the brother of Jared, with Moroni, that those who have enough faith can gain visitations from angels. And in the circumstance of like the temple, why is it called the house of the Lord? Because as Russell M. Nelson said on the last conference at the very beginning, that all the houses of the Lord are a place where the Lord himself can manifest himself, right? And that won't happen to everyone. That won't happen to most people. But I do think that, and this is sort of what got us thinking about the temple as an interdimensional sort of portal, that is sort of an invitation with the way the world is going. They've said throughout many conferences that to survive what's coming in the world, we will need the constant guide and companionship of the Holy Ghost. This last conference, he said that we will need to receive the fullness of the Holy Ghost, which is the baptism by fire, not just the gift of the Holy Ghost, but truly being awake to the voice of the Holy Ghost. And also that they quoted, they will see my face and know that I am. So I think that was sort of an open invitation to those that are seeking to grow closer to Christ, that like bad stuff's going to happen in the world. And we truly will need to go to the temple and be visionary men, right? Like Dave Butler in this book, he's talking about the religion of First Temple Judaism and Lehi in the Book of Mormon when he's fleeing to preserve the plain and precious things, that this ancient temple religion and, the work of Margaret Barker, who she's a Methodist, recreating this older religion as well, which led to Christianity. We can confirm that this was a vision where this religion was where they would go to the temple and they would do these ceremonies that represent entering into the presence of God. And they believed that they could go there and they could gain visions and all that stuff. So that's really what I think that's an invitation for,
Man, I got so many thoughts in so many directions. I think the audience. Let's hope that let's calm down for the goyim for a second. Let's see if they can connect some of the dots. Because there's a lot that was just broken down here. Also, I do want to say, because I saw Nachiketa, I'm sorry for being dyslexic, in the chat earlier, and he had a point that was decent to bring up. He said some temples look like computer chips from above. Do you guys think they could function in that capacity? Do you want to think about that for a second, actually?
Well, that sort of goes back to the thing where, you see ancient sigils, from the Temple of Solomon, that look very similar to computer chips. And I do think that that's very possible. That could be a flow of energy, right? That exactly. The way it does is that energy flows the same way on a small and big scale. It's sort of like how when you look at galaxies and stuff like that, the patterns repeat themselves on big and small. When you look at DNA, it's a spiral. When you look at a galaxy, it's a spiral. It's universal energy, and that sort of goes into our connection with the universe and the divine, I think.
Yeah, I agree. But there's definitely something to the idea of the technology of the temple, right? Because it's not built as a joke. It's not built just for show. There's actually, it seems like, value again in everything to this. And what you keep pointing out is that this is not about anything that everyone's heard of, everyone's got a rebranding of this, right? You know, you might say Christianity, you might say Mormonism, you might say Judaism, but everyone has their understanding of what those words are, and they're different from your definition, which is your definition is based on an original historical, prehistorical thing, whereas theirs are based on like the concurrent misusage, right? So there's already like a Tower of Babel misunderstanding of language in what we're talking about here. But what you're saying essentially is that there is a objective way to do things, and that it causes you essentially to interact, like there's a celestial veil, right? Is
Yes.
that kind of...
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Actually, there's something I can't really pull it up because it's on Instagram, but there was an account that I know that they posted something about like endowment symbolism and stuff. I'm gonna see if I can pull this up if you can see on my phone. But
It's really
there's this ancient image you can sort of see right there. It's a hand.
Oh, wow.
Right? And this symbol, this is an ancient Christian symbol found in old Orthodox churches, old Catholic churches, that it represents the hand of God reaching through the veil, right? Reaching towards humanity, which goes in line with the Archangel Michael in the book of Enoch, grasping Enoch's hand to raise him up. Now, raising up, that is sort of atonement verbology, right? Like raising up the same way Jesus Christ is raised up on the cross, and that through his atonement, we are also elevated, that the Son of God became what we are so that we might become like what he is. You know, that ancient sort of theosis that the early church fathers would talk about in Christianity, you know? So we do see that same symbolism with the Book of Ether in the Book of Mormon. Again, that's the greatest example of endowment symbolism. Book of Ether is one of the greatest books in the Book of Mormon in general, but where the brother of Jared he asks God to touch Jehovah, to touch these stones so that he would be able to see light in the dark of those barges. And then from the cloud of mist that the Lord is in, he reaches out and touches the stones, and he sees a human-like hand, and he is shocked because people are thinking that God is this some other thing, but the ultimate conclusion is that we have that connection to the divine. We are images of the divine. And if we are made in the image of God, then God is somewhat like us. So it's a shocking thing, not necessarily to say that, oh, God has a hand like us, but that we have a hand like God, you know?
Right. So I want to bring up something I saw earlier that, there was a Netflix show, and people have been bringing this up because they're just like, oh, there's like two things you hear. Like when people hear about Mormonism, there's like the Brighamism of like 1840. They're like, wait, aren't the Mormons like cowboys who have 30 wives, like and live in are them like Amish people? Like it's weird. Or they think that they're the Netflix show that they just saw recently. And the Netflix show was interesting to me because I went into it thinking, oh man, this is just going to be ridiculous. It's going to make fun of everything. And this is a real story about a mother who during the pandemic, she thought that, pandemic, Freudian slip.
Sorry, my bad.
My bad. Really. I really.
It was totally real, guys.
It is what it is. Yeah. But so the point is, she was LDS woman in a temple, and she was going to the temple, and she was experiencing the veil, right? Like she was beyond the veil. Like she was talking to spirits, but she also wasn't living her life the way you're supposed to live your life. You know what I mean? And a lot of people think it's sort of like they're gonna like do deep research into you, and they're gonna just you're not allowed, which could happen, but a lot of the time it might be that you might be able to. Let's just say you're super good at being evil, and you're able to, or maybe accidentally, naturally good at lying, and you get your way in. And they think you're telling the truth, then they think you're totally following the rules that they didn't make up, that they're barely able to understand themselves about rules that, like Chad's saying, go back thousands of years, right? Like they don't completely even understand what these rules are. They're God's rules. They're not their own rules. And you're not following them. You know what I mean? And like, see what happens is she starts talking to evil spirits, essentially, as far as I could tell. I mean, I shouldn't judge, but these spirits did tell her to like kill her kids, and like that their kids were replaced with zombies, like to like murder her family members. I forget the whole deal, but it was just that the apocalypse was coming. Basically, I don't know. It's interesting to me because a lot of the time people are so desperate to hear from God. They don't really want to put in the work though to like meet God at the mountain, because it's like a lot of exercise. So then they're willing to meet whomever is going to meet them in their, at midnight at a crossroads.
Yeah. That reminds me of something I was just thinking about earlier, right? So obviously there's the idea that you need to be worthy to pass through the veil. And I think one obvious reason and something that is taught in the temple is the temple does teach you how to distinguish between good and evil spirits. And that's not really something I can go into for a variety of reasons. And that's also why I've actually put off getting endowed, is because I want to feel like I'm ready to experience that sort of thing. Most people just in Utah go like, oh, I'm getting married. And then they're just completely shocked when it's like this weird mystical ritual thing and it freaks them out, right? Because they're expecting some like little cutesy Sunday school Jesus loves you thing, right?
That's very true.
Right. But that does raise an interesting point that the endowment for a reason specifically teaches you how to distinguish evil spirits. And that is because after you receive the endowment of power, that is when the veil is thinned. I can attest to the fact that after I first became an elder, so the deeper you get into the priesthood, the more you will experience the light of Christ and evil. The very night, I have told this story a little bit before, I can confirm that something crazy happened to me because I wasn't the only person who witnessed that there was some sort of demonic spirit. It was in an Airbnb. I didn't know about this earlier, but there was another person who was staying there in that room previous to me because we were doing solar, and that person was in the room before, and then they left and I got the room because I was on the couch. But it was the day after I become an elder. I was just frozen in my bed when I woke up, and I saw this shadow move across the room, and I could not move until I literally called upon the name of Jesus Christ, and I jolted up and it was just gone. And I could hear it breathing, and I could feel the breathing on my neck when it ran behind me. Went back to sleep. It happened again. This happened multiple times in the exact same room until I called upon the power of the Melchizedek priesthood, and I commanded it to leave, and it was gone. And then that girl who also experienced similar things in the same room before me, that nobody believed her, as soon as she gets back, kicks me out of the room, is back in there, completely fine now. She doesn't have any more issues with that, right? So the closer you get to God, the more you will experience evil things. And I think that's why some of those deeper esoteric things aren't as taught often. Someone who actually pulled me aside and told me about a lot of these things, about seeing the face of God and the veil and all these things, did tell me that God does not reveal himself to those who are not ready, because God is not in the habit of making sons of perdition.
That's very true. That's very true. What I found really interesting about what everything has been said so far is that you said that the temple is a gateway, right? And the
Yes.
thing about a gateway is that it can be open and it can be closed. And so when you're not worthy, then you can't access it. And I think in the cases for a lot of members in the church is what they end up doing to the temple anyways, because, they've got a trip, they've got to go. They don't want to stand out. They don't want to be different than everyone else. They just want to fit in. So they'll do these rituals and do these things without being ready. And so what they end up doing is being far from God in a place when you're supposed to be close to him. I mean, you say that the temple is the place where the veil is thinned. Kind of an example that I can give with that is like, think about Noah's time when there was a flood. Probably the only places where there wouldn't be a flood would be like the tallest of mountains. And when you think of a spiritual place in the Old Testament, you think of a mountain. And so if you go to the mountain, which now we represent as a temple, it's kind of that place where you're safe from the flood, especially in these times when the world is, kind of filling up with water. It's starting to rain. And so, yeah, it's really interesting what the prophets were saying at General Conference about all of that. There's a lot more I could bring to the subject, but if you want to talk, I'll just let you.
Yeah, and that lady you're talking about, I'm not super familiar with the story at all, but from what you say, one thing that I might be my opinion is that maybe some of the revelation she claims she received was true, and it literally just drove her crazy because, I mean, maybe the world is ending. I'm not going to say I've received any revelation on that. I'm not going to say I haven't. But I think that revealing that sort of thing would, if you're just some lady, might mess with your head a little bit. And I think that when your head's being messed with, that does open you up to crazier things and evil influences. Absolutely.
Yeah, it sucks, doesn't it? It's like, this is Scientologists say that. They're like, well, if you knew too much about the truth and you weren't ready for it, then you'd stay up all night and like lose sleep over it and go crazy. And so that's why we can't tell you the truth. But at the end of the day, people who know just a little bit about how the government works lose sleep, stay up all night, and go crazy. So you can only imagine knowing more than a little bit. And yeah, I can hear you on. I've said it before myself. If you don't have a source for the esoteric truth, then someone weird and esoteric is going to try to offer it to you. The problem is, it's always satanic, pedophile, murder, all these horrible things. Like Satan has a brand, Satan has signature moves, That's the thing. It's like it always ends. So that's what blows my mind, because it's always like, kill your family. Like what? Like how could you literally?
I think that's why with personal revelation, there's a book I'm actually reading about it that I was recommended by the people who taught me about the veil. It's called, I believe it's by John Pontius, if you've heard of him. It's like called, let me go to my books. What's it called? Following the light of Christ into his presence. And one point he really makes across is that the iron rod in Lehi's dream is not just the scripture, it is personal revelation. But you also must make personal revelation line up with what the scriptures and what the prophets are saying. Now, the prophets, the apostles, I know a lot of people in sort of the esoteric communities that do have problems with them not necessarily diving into deep topics, and I think they're very fallible men at times.
I have a really funny meme about that here.
I've seen that actually.
Russell M. Nelson addressed the LDS conference without a word on racial or LGBTQ issues. Oh no. Well, if you can't say something nice.
But as we were saying together before, not just you, but in that group chat, there are many members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who, when you talk about these deeper subjects, just completely go off on you and be like, no, that's not right. Like they're almost like evangelical.
Like one is like, dude, you're not supposed to talk about this, but that's less and less.
Yeah,
I kind of I can dig that if someone's like, okay,
that's too sacred,
I'm learning to understand that to an exceptional level these days, just because of the amount of crazy people in the world. But
there's also people who just like think that it's that personal revelation is like completely undoctrinal. Like they go to General Conference and they think that the only thing Jesus Christ ever taught was like be nice to your neighbor, right? Like, I mean, he did teach that, but
yeah, he wasn't a magazine salesman. It's kind of weird how it's being presented by, and it's a weird, like, large demographic. It's kind of humanization thing. Do you think that it's like just secularism in general? Like if something becomes the state, that in the repetition, it loses its core flow?
Well, yeah, that's actually a good point, because like if you look at like say some TV show or some anime or something that like you love, right? And when just like a small community who's into it, it's great. But then as soon as it gets more popular, it's just people ruin it, But to put it from more of a doctrinal standpoint, I think that there are people who have a form of godliness, but they teach the doctrine and precepts of man. They have a form of godliness, but they deny the power thereof.
Ooh, new sub goal is 144,000. Thank you for setting that for me. That's what I now understand to be realistic. Okay, so when we're making this like idea though that it closes the portal on you if you're not healthy, is that true? Because it seems to me what we're getting is something far more sinister, right?
I think
you're getting like the wrong dial. Like that portal's open to hell. You know, like this is like a bad horror film. All of a sudden you're talking to people who are telling you to like kill babies. That's worse than the portal closing. That's the portal being open to a bad place.
Well, I think so. The temple itself, I don't think that the temple is going to manifest demons or some evil spirits. I think that's, blessed and sanctified. However, once you are endowed, you have access to that. You receive the endowment of power. You can pass through the veil once you are ready. And that is exactly why the endowment teaches you how to discern good from evil spirits, is because both of those you can see. That is why the veil in a way is in place, is because the less we have access to those things, then the less we have to worry about it, right? The more you enter into the realm of spirituality, the more there is this dark fog around that is full of evil spirits, right? So that is why you have to hold on to the iron rod of Christ. You have to get through the fog of darkness, right? And that is why you need to discern. So again, like, I'm not endowed. I haven't been through the temple. I understand it better than a lot of people who have gone through, I feel like, just because, there's just the average, like, okay, yeah, I guess I'll go do it and I'll go on my mission. And they don't, I'm reading all these books about like temple mysticism and stuff of the ancient Israelite temple.
And they're drinking Coca-Cola and abstaining from hot drinks. I know. I've seen
exactly it. Right.
LDS memes. Do you have thoughts on this?
On endowment, I personally have received my endowment. I personally share your opinion about people just kind of losing track of what's important and what's not. They'll just kind of go get their endowment and be like, oh, well, it's all weird and it's all, ritual like, and I wasn't prepared for this and all that. And it's basically the result of what the church has been enforcing, which is basically, don't really worry too much about deep doctrine. Oh, well, don't really worry too much about this and that. Just Jesus loves you and love your neighbor and don't drink coffee, and the very simple things. And it's not very like bad in a sense, but what it leads to is just so many people leaving the church because they have absolutely no knowledge of what's true and how they can have a personal relationship with God. Because when you go looking in Utah, some places in Idaho even, most of the members are just having this connection with the people around them. They don't really have a direct relationship to God, and that impacts it deeply. To bring back on what you were saying, Xirtus, about the temple and this sort of portal to hell, no, I don't think that there's a portal to hell. But a concept that I would want to think about more, which I can't do now because it would take time, is that maybe that though the temple is a beautiful and sacred place, that it's one's impurity that blocks their vision and their connection to the temple itself. Do you have any thoughts on that, Latterwave, Chad?
Yeah, I mean, I have my thought though is really kind of like a frequency thing. So I imagine when we're thinking about the first temple, for instance, you have a period where there's an endowment. It's not just to be endowed sounds kind of cool, even, dude, did you get endowed? But it's the endowment of power. You know what I mean? So this Jedi kind of miracle kung fu master period, like this is a fantasy period almost to imagine, where there's people walking amongst us that are commanding people not to die and are priests, the way that the first temple is supposed to be. But it doesn't stay that way. Like, it gets to a point where people who have been endowed with power are talking to evil spirits. That seems to be a major common at that point. And child sacrifice, which like weirdly prevalent today. You just wouldn't think that, like, of all the trends that, like, all the fads from retro to come back into, I just didn't see that one. I figured like bell bottoms before that one. But
and you're exactly right. That is a pattern, because after that, what I was trying to get at is that after you were endowed, that opens up the spiritual realm of good and evil to you.
Yeah, generally, I think, and maybe your frequency is like a radio station, maybe.
So think of it like this: like, the more we're blinded by the veil, the less we are. Think of it like when you're a kid, right? How we have the age of accountability. At that point, you don't need to be baptized by then. You're covered by the grace of Christ and whatnot. But after you reach the age of accountability, the devil can tempt you. And the more and more covenants you make with God, the closer you get to God, the more susceptible you are to the devil, which is why you have the idea of the sons of perdition, somebody who has received the fullness of Christ's light and still chooses to reject him. There will be no forgiveness, as Christ says in the Bible, in this life or the next for those people, right? And I think that's what it has to do with. That's one reason why I'm carefully preparing before I go to the temple, is because I've already experienced some crazy stuff like that. And it's like, once you reach that point where you do the endowment of power and you truly understand, you are on thin ice, where you are open up to the greatest of blessings, where if you are worthy, as the scripture says, you will see my face and know that I am. And on the other hand, you will also be susceptible to evil spirits, that they will be able to directly speak with you as well and communicate with you. And as the scriptures, the Book of Mormon, the Bible both say, the devil appears as an angel of light to deceive, right? So I think what we're seeing there is that people who are not necessarily ready to handle that sort of stuff, which has certainly gotten me rethinking, like, oh, whoa, hold on, how soon do I want to do this, right? That if you aren't ready, those beings will attack you and they will try to use you, whether it's because, like in Joseph Smith's case, before the first vision, before he saw Jesus Christ and the Father, there was an evil spirit, which was likely Satan himself, which tried to prevent him from doing that. So there may be cases where the devil sees the potential of some person and tries to stop them from becoming the son of God that they could be, or where they see somebody is susceptible to manipulation, like that woman you were speaking about, where they will try to use their weaknesses against them.
Yeah, Chad, couldn't have said it better. Yeah, couldn't have said it better, Chad. And when you talk about the devil and his influence on people, it's not always because someone's bad or that they're wicked or that they don't keep their covenants. I mean, Satan can attack anyone whenever they want, and usually it's people that have great potential, like you said. And you remember, and I remember, we've shared an experience together at some point. So of course,
I'm not going to share all the details, but
talk all the details.
Go ahead. Yeah, obviously. So it was actually 3 of us that this happened to the same night about a week ago, where I didn't speak of it at first. They were talking about it in the chat, and then I brought it up. Is this what happened? So the same night, we all have a sort of sleep paralysis dream where there are demonic figures, apparitions in our rooms that we see in this sleep paralysis attacking us. And they did attack us in the extremely specific exact same way. It was the weirdest thing. And I thought it was just maybe a dream or something when I first did it, but I hear them talking about the weird things that happened to them the night before, LDS memes and another person in our group chat. And I bring it up and he like private messages me. I private message both of them. The exact same thing happened to us the exact same night.
Right. I'm just looking at some of these pictures because someone in the audience is asking, like, why are we entertaining these fairy tales? And, I would say it's kind of reductionist, but the reason being, I think we'll just repeat, looking at like circuit boards and the idea that Solomon used demons to build the temple, and that there are demons out there. There's angels and demons. There's power in the universe that we're experiencing. It's not all evil, but it's not all good. And, we need to understand that. We need to understand whatever that is from whatever perspective we can. I feel like the most ancient perspective often is laughed at and ignored. And that's the one that probably we need to go back to and understand the most, because it's just crazy how much this is repeating. Again, like we're saying, our current civilization, masked in plastic technology, is still doing the same crazy things that they did at the fall of the first temple.
Oh yeah, like there's Bohemian Grove. There's literally people in the government going out into the woods,
like
and
Bud Light compared
they're
to,
literally,
you know what I mean? Like it's just it's so dark.
Yeah, like they're literally these people that are these bankers and politicians, and we can prove this is real. Go out and worship this owl statue of a demonic biblical god that they would sacrifice children to, and they run around naked in the woods and have orgies and do mock human sacrifices to this idol.
Yeah. I think
Sounds like a secret combination.
A lot to be said also for the fact that those people are all about technology. We talked about Jack Parsons before. I don't want to go too far in a deviation, but Jack Parsons, who was one of the most important rocket engineers, the reason why Lockheed Martin has the logo of a pentagram is because, let me show you the Lockheed logo. I'm going to go back there for a second. Is this pentagram, right? Because the dude was a thelemic occultist, right? I mean, he was all about Aleister Crowley and occult and everything like that. Aleister Crowley was all about Joseph Smith. He was super jealous.
Yeah, he was. Aleister Crowley wanted to be like the anti-Joseph Smith. Like Aleister Crowley said about Joseph Smith, he was a man who had the Urim and Thummim and could talk to the angels and gods that govern this world. And Aleister Crowley wanted to be like the anti-Christ false prophet to Joseph Smith's prophet of the Restoration. But we all know that Karl Marx was the actual anti-Joseph Smith.
Yeah, I mean, even that's an example, Urim and Thummim, because you're looking at
the seer stone.
Other than technology, this idea that there's a spiritual technology involved with crystals. I mean, it's all technology.
Yeah, and that's all in the Bible, like that there are these mystical seer stones that the high Melchizedek priest would have. Like, I think that most of like the rock and the hat type story with Joseph Smith is completely fabricated. I've dug into it by the roots. The earliest of this is from a third-hand account that says it was like spectacles in a hat. However, the Urim and Thummim was a rock of sorts. It was attached to a string. It was a clear stone, it sounds like, and it was attached to the breastplate, and it would be used for the translation and receiving of revelation. And it's in the Bible. It's what the Aaronic priests, the brothers of Moses, would use.
Right.
Though I do find it interesting that that experience we had, that synced up, sort of vision dream being demonically attacked, that was very similar, because, in the divine council, we're constantly talking about the visionary men and King Josiah, which, in fact, we're having the author of Plain and Precious Things coming on in about a month or so, that we're trying to figure that out, because I was able to get a hold of him. But I think that it is the single most important thing when it comes to not just the LDS Church, but Jesus Christ, understanding the First Temple Judaism.
We got some schizo posting in here that's actually pretty cool. I wanted to, you pull that book up first.
This book shows, this is proof that Jesus Christ always has been taught about. And we are declaring this very loudly. There are multiple people that I've spoken to that I explained to them the First Temple theology, that it heavily focused on Jehovah being the son of the high God and the Melchizedek priesthood, and that it takes place suspiciously at the same time as the Book of Mormon.
Catch that fish and we'll reel that one in slow. Let's talk a bit about the difference again between, because this is basically X-Church. This is a unique thing that is primordial. And we kind of we talked about that a bit last time, the idea that this isn't just something else. This is what archaeologists are discovering, the original.
Yeah, it's real.
But let's look at I don't know if it's fair to call it schizo posting, but I mean that with love, by the way. House of Jehovah says, complete third temple, where's daddy's drone, Psalm 2, which is good. Julian, I don't get that one yet. Anunnaki intelligence. There was a couple good ones here. He had the couple I wanted to read. Yeshua was hung on a tree. That one was interesting because, according to witchcraft and folk magic and things like that, and just people, if you hang somebody from a tree, that tree's cursed, right? He brings this up. And he even says this later. That's a good point. This idea that it's cursed, this cursed logic, so that we're living in two separate Christianities, the way that lady thought that there was two separate Christianities, one that says to love each other, and another one that says to kill kids. I mean, clearly it's the satanic religion.
It's the devil appearing as an angel of light.
Yeah, it's it seems like that's kind of that's the cursed forever kind of thing. So we have a dualistic thing where you either accept or don't accept it, and you can accept some other truth instead of the truth. You can accept your truth, but the objective truth, again, this is the thing we're trying to figure out. And it seems like tonality to me. I'm thinking of climatic patterns. You've seen this, right? Where you take a subwoofer and you put sand on it and it makes certain rings, right? And they've done that with the Notre Dame windows, and they found they're like perfect frequencies. And those are the frequencies that Royal Rife used for sound healing. Royal Rife was invented some of the earliest sonication technology, right? When they play certain frequencies, which will destroy tumors. So the idea that you go to the original temples and you feel better, literally, because it heals you from a cold, right? Like there's technology and objective practical uses to the temple at that point. But it also says like it makes more sense all of a sudden why these rules are all about things you might think are arbitrary. Like, why do I have to be healthy? Why do I have to be good? Like, why? Like, who really cares? Like, is it just a game, or is it because you won't have the capacity to jump the hurdle unless you've done the exercises?
I'm gonna get a sip of water, but you want to hear something that might be good, but's kind of a little schizo?
Always. I mean, you know me.
This will sound weird for a second, but you're talking about, when you were talking about two different Christianities, I was thinking of something completely different. How on one side of Christianity, you have this sort of, love Jesus, and then you have more esoteric stuff. And sometimes diving too far into the esoteric stuff leads people off the deep end. I think anime is the answer to that. And that might sound kind of crazy. Because here's the thing. Every single anime has the same thing. So you got the main character, you got like Naruto or whoever, who's got some demon inside of him, right? And he's got this hidden mystical power, and the demon tries to take him over or whatever. And you want to know what the answer to that always is? The power of friendship, the power of love, the power of bonds. So we have these two things that are meeting together, where if you want to stay grounded while entering into the esoteric spiritual realm, genuine love for other human beings is needed. That is what grounds you. That is what keeps you from going off the deep end and being consumed by evil spirits, by being consumed by the nine-tailed fox. And you want to know what's very interesting? What is another thing that the endowment is very connected to? The ceiling, right? So those two things are connected because it is the divine masculine and feminine, when unified together, that give the answer to that.
Based. All right, you can get some water. LDS memes. You can. I'm sure you've got a lot of comments to say. I'm sorry that you've been held back. Now I'm no longer. Tag him into the ring.
It's totally fine. It's totally fine. Yeah, there's a lot of things that have been said. So I don't think I've had a proper time to kind of introduce myself real quick. So the thing about me is that I'm kind of in that kind of personality, and in my studies of theology, one of the things I focus a lot on is psychology, and try to find out what are the reasons why certain people will make certain decisions in spiritual contexts. And one of the things that I've kind of thought about a lot has been reasons why people leave the church other than doctrinal. What is the kind of the social norm or mood or kind of hard drive they have that gets them to leave? And, a lot of people have talked about something called the placebo effect, and I'm sure you know what that is. And, it's kind of this thought that you feel happy and have a certain emotional response to something that isn't true. But because you believe it's true, then you still have the effects from that. And so a lot of people have been saying, well, when you pray, you think that you're receiving help. And so your body reacts with a chemical response that makes you feel like it actually exists and it's true, and it makes you feel good. And what you kind of come to find out when you kind of delve deeper into all of the studies of sociology is that it's not actually true. It only applies to when you're talking with other people, and it's kind of convincing you of something. It's not inanimate. Yeah, I out of anything and all the notes that I've kind of made in my mind from earlier, I've forgotten a good amount, but I'm sure it'll come back to me eventually. I really liked your remarks, Chad.
Next time you have thoughts, feel free to push them in there.
Chime in.
We're all polite except for me. Chaz just made it. It was good to see you, bro. How's it going? Gnostic memes. Gnostic here.
Just got another podcast. Slipped into this one.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, so Chad's just been talking. We've been talking a bit about the veil. Temples are interdimensional gateways. We're getting to this kind of idea of what that would mean, right? Like when we say like interdimensional gateways, right? And we talked a little bit about the idea of like frequencies, a little bit about the old temple.
We talked about
the idea that there could be like, if your endowment of power is done when you're not prepared, it might not just it could not work, but it could also like lead to you being open to like other evil things that are, you know, if you're not able to speak to God and you're in that like kind of energy, maybe there's something else there, right? That sometimes is trying to latch onto you, which is why God tries to, or whatever is trying to keep you from having that until you're ready, right?
Yeah, and why the temple teaches you to discern evil spirits, because like once you're endowed, you're open to spiritual realm much wider, one might say.
Yeah, open the doors of your perception and everything. That's what they warn about, like with taking psychedelics and stuff. Some people meet Jesus, some people meet Beelzebub or whatever. Yeah, I think that's potentially the case, and you kind of get some of this talk about revealing information before people are ready for it, because then if they reject it, that it's all in right time. I mean, there's only those who are able to discern can understand whether an individual is ready to receive something or not. I think that's accurate. And whenever it comes to these wavelengths, I think, yeah, we have observed other spiritual practitioners that have alternative methods to gain access to these parallel worlds. I think it's ultimately whether you're vibrating higher or vibrating lower, as new agey as that sounds. I do think there is something to that idea of having a wavelength that you're tuning into, for sure.
I mean, I know it doesn't mean that, but there literally is a book of ether. I'm just saying.
No, and whenever you talk to the Pratt brothers, they refer to the ether, and they talk about how this Holy Spirit is a fine substance that penetrates the deepest pores of every rock and every substance, and it's all mind, and it's directly affected by the will of the Father and the Son. And so that's kind of the animistic sort of perspective on things. And so it seems to line right up with kind of New Age thought that if everything is mentalism, you know, with Kabbalah and everything, the Kabbalion, I mean, it lines right up with that sinking into the right frequency, and the temples being that method of inducing these frequencies, just like other temples around the world that are consecrated and made a sacred space.
Let's. I wanted to bring up something because you earlier were talking about anime and also I Am That I Am. And so I've brought this up on my show before, but I think it's interesting. In Japan, the emperor has the imperial regalia. It's like the way to be the emperor. And it's this like jelly bean thing, this shield, and this Zelda sword. And at some point, you know, I was watching this Japanese kid's video about it, and he was like, yeah, and you know, some people say that there's like some association with, you know, the Israelites, because I mean, obviously the thing doesn't really look Japanese, but when they, you know, looked at it, they turned it around and they read the back of the shield said, I am that I am, in like a prototypical Hebrew script that they had. So I thought that was really interesting. This idea also of this sort of I am that I am, all over the world in different places that they're finding, you know, like the connection there.
Yeah, it's the name of the Lord. I mean, the Sufis and the Sikhs, the Sikhs, however you pronounce it, talk about the name, the Nam, and it seems to all go back to this mental plane of awareness, the base unit of reality being consciousness itself, and us being a prism.
Frequencies, like I mean, I always think about that also, like in terms of frequencies and music and everything like that. Do you think that that's, you know, how important do you think that is? I mean, one of the things also is just it's so hard to follow the rules to build a temple, right? Like according to the Solomon temple rules, like you have to follow all these rules to build a temple. Like, what do you think those rules are? Are we always following those rules today?
So I think there's a lot of references whenever it comes to the importance of resonance and stuff. I'm blanking on the name. Who's the guy who marched around the city of Jericho? Yeah, so they march around X amount of times and they blow the horns, and the resonance is enough to make the walls crumble. You see the videos of people putting little oscillators on the steel bridges, and it matches the frequency of the bridge, and it's able to make the whole thing wobble, right? So we understand the importance of frequency. Maybe whenever Moses took off his sandals at the burning bush, it was something to do with grounding himself to the earth. There seems to be some validity to having that direct skin connection to the electromagnetic field of the earth. So I do think there's a lot. I think the temple should be acoustically designed. I mean, all the Renaissance chapels and everything, the acoustics are just perfect. In my personal experience, like music, I think this is something the Protestants have figured out. Like there is like a strong connection between creating an environment that can help induce this mystical state, you know, whether we like it or not. So that's a good segue into like Pentecostals, like what spirit, what vibration are they like going into whenever they're rolling around on the floor and you know, talking with glossolalia, tongues, and all this other stuff. Is that satanic? I don't know. They're feeling brighter after. Is it just a different form? I don't know, but I do think vibrations in music and as well as ritualistic behavior are all tools to induce our consciousness to open up to these higher states for sure.
Yeah.
So, Chess, you talk about electromagnetic fields and grounding in the ground. So, Muslims, as we know, Islam has had basically barefoot like areas in mosques for a very long time, for forever. And mainly it's part of the culture, but it could have been because they knew about like grounding in electromagnetic fields. As we know, there were a lot of ancient civilizations that knew a lot about science and about the body's connection to nature and the surrounding world. We know that the Egyptians knew a lot about that, definitely, with technologies that exceeded what we're even capable of doing today. And maybe that's something the Muslims knew. Do you think that we're ever going to achieve a time when we will be able to just walk barefoot in the temple? I don't know.
Dude, you know about the Kufic alphabet, right? And the ancient Arabic before it looked Spanish like it does now. This is how it used to look.
Oh my gosh, it's freaking QR codes. That's crazy.
Yeah, totally. So
yeah, no, I think so. Like Sikhs do the same thing, and so they take off their shoes before they enter in the temple, and they enter into that operating system that they developed to induce these states for them, these mystical states for them. And it's kind of interesting that all the angels, they appear with human-like clothes. At least they have robes and everything. That whenever Joseph Smith is claiming to see these entities, but they're always barefoot. I think that's interesting for sure. I think there is
interesting point.
Yeah. So Moroni. Go ahead.
So, you ever seen Prince of Egypt?
Mm-hmm.
So, like the scene when Moses takes off his sandals, what God says to him is that this is sacred ground, right?
Oh, dude, so key.
Right. So it's like this idea of, well, what you wear special garments within the temple, right? You wear special clothing. The Bible describes you doing that, right? So, what if it's like the idea of being in a more pure state where the shoes are sort of a dirty, worldly thing where, for example, when Margaret Barker's talking about in the book of Enoch, how the garments that he receives in the temple represent the resurrected body. So it's like by removing your shoes, you're entering into more of a pure state.
Well, yeah, it's like when you're entering a sacred space, you're taking off your shoes so that Jesus can wash your feet. You know what I mean?
I think there's some sort of, I remember someone referencing the blood in the temple, or the floor in the temple being covered with blood from the animals and everything. And so there's some sort of connection with Jesus washing the feet of his disciples, with that their feet might have actually been saturated with the blood already. And so that can be symbolic on a couple different levels. But yeah.
What do you think about?
I have really thick calluses on my feet. I walk barefoot outside all day long. I have a garden in my yard, and that's kind of my thing. I try and keep the dogs free, you know.
Yeah.
What do you think about with in First Kings when Solomon has the stones cut by the demons or whatever, the spirits he's got mastered? They do it outside of the temple because the sound of it's going to like destroy the temple or something. What's the rule for that? It's done in some sort of a circumstance in order to keep it like far away to maintain the sanctity of the temple.
So yeah, he was like the master of the demons or something like that. Yeah. He had like a ring. Yeah. I know very little on that topic, but I mean, wasn't there a noise associated with whenever the veil was ripped in the temple whenever after Jesus' crucifixion? Like, wasn't there the ground quaking and all kinds of stuff as well?
Yeah, and like earth opens up, tears open. I think I forget if it's Luke or isn't there like one of the Gospels like skeletons rise from the dead?
Oh yeah, there were people who the dead, certain members of the dead in Jerusalem resurrected when he resurrected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought it was also that there was something like more terrifying when he died, though. Like, because it gets all dark, and I feel like skeletons come out of the ground, like some horrible goth music video from the year 2000. But then everyone recognizes like, all right, this is like slightly more intense than we expected.
That might be from like the Apocalypse of Peter or something. It might not be in the canonical Bible. It might be apocryphal. Because it does sound vaguely familiar, but
you gotta be careful when they raise you Catholic. They have extra. They give you extras.
Yeah, because that does sound like something like out of the Harrowing of Hell or something.
Yeah. Well, okay. Speaking of things on that level, and only to the level that you feel comfortable, because it sounded like earlier you were, there's limits to what we ought to be saying about. But honestly, there's a lot of verses about it that are important. But understanding how to recognize evil spirits, right? First off, like to shake their hand, I think is like one of the D&Cs. What do you think about? What do you want to say about that though? Because I think that's like a huge thing. If you're in a world where I hear from people all the time that are saying that they hear from things and they don't know how to like stop it necessarily, right? Maybe they were naively members earlier in their life, and now like it's come back to haunt them that they've been alcoholics or like went off to live their lives elsewhere on a Rumspringa. Like, what do you think is the way to be careful about that?
I think it's lectures on faith is super important because once you understand the character and attributes of God, then it becomes a lot easier to discern whether the message that you're receiving is in line with that or if it's getting twisted. But ultimately, I think stillness is the first requirement for you to be able to even hear the Lord's voice in those moments of stillness, in centering prayer. And you become quiet enough where you can hear the still small voice. You might be shocked in that stillness. It becomes louder than you, and you require less sensitivity for you to hear it than you would otherwise. But I think, honestly, you have to start from stillness because, if you are from a place of the demons are attacking me on all ends and then an angel appears to me, red flags should definitely go up because, that's the opportunity where you're being tested. And I think you could kind of have that, you could draw on that previous spiritual experiences that you've had, the more non-visionary experiences whenever you are in that stillness, and you can see if you can identify that same sensation as well. Of course, I've never met an angel wherever I've been able to shake their hand or anything like that. I don't know, Chad might have, but have you had any experiences like that where you've had a chance to I know these are topics that you generally aren't supposed to talk about. Do you or anyone you know potentially have any experience with shaking an angel's hand?
I haven't, but I do know people that have, yes.
Yeah.
So I was actually the same people who were instructing me about like the endowment and the veil and stuff did mention to me, we talked for like 8 hours about this stuff straight. And they did mention to me talking about like how to deal with demons, how to cast them out, how to identify them, right? And so, for example, sorry, I'm getting a little uncomfortable. Demons.
And don't, if you don't feel comfortable, obviously.
No, I meant like I was literally uncomfortable where I was sitting.
Sorry.
But so they have had experiences like that where there are varying degrees of apparitions when it comes to demonic ones. They will sometimes appear like in the corner of your eye, for example, in a shadowy sort of way. That's the most I've ever seen. But there are times where you can tell if somebody is possessed, they told me. And they have also told me that it does happen more often, like if you were endowed or if you were in that sort of position. And they did explain to me a few situations about like having to shake the hand, having to discern those spirits and knowing that they were demonic. And they also did explain situations where it was an angelic being. The closest I've ever got was, that experience I said I've had like with a dream where I haven't seen like a physical angel in the real world, but I do have that vision that I truly believe was real because it told me things I couldn't have possibly known, where it's like, okay, that was an angelic visitation, I can now say much later. But like for me, it's like I said before, I'm definitely hesitant to be endowed because I feel like the more you go towards that point, I guess to put in better terms, the closer you get towards the tree of life, the further the fog gets, and the more things are in the fog trying to get you off the path, and the worse the consequences are for getting off of it.
Yeah, Chad, what I will say is, you're, getting there, you're progressing, you know a lot. And I completely understand your fear about that. And what I will say is, there's probably no better way to trust the Lord than to know when you're ready, of course. When you're ready and that you go.
Right.
I was worried and I didn't do it right when I was 18. I was not endowed right when I was 18. But the thing is, I don't know exactly what you're thinking, but I can tell you that it's definitely something that you have to go through.
Right.
A greater
it's almost like
spiritually, yeah.
If you want to progress.
The story that comes to mind is Peter Tosh. I don't know if you ever listened to reggae music, but reggae is Rastafarianism is Black Mormonism. I'm going to go ahead and say. There's definitely differences. Don't get me wrong, but here's a guy who talked a lot about false prophets, and he talked about demons and how demons would try to trick him. And he talked about how he shook the hand of an angel once and he knew that it was really of God, and it made him like super religious, right? Like changed his whole life. And he was all about the first temple period. So to me, I see this like the there be dragons thing, right? Where you look around the world and you find evidence of people saying there were dragons, but then there's dinosaurs or whatever the deal is. There's a common denominator, and it's the first temple period. Yes. And that idea also of physical celestial, that's something that can manifest and control the material plane of reality, that is the highest level of intention, right? Because it's something that can it's divine principle that can manifest itself in the material with intention. Whereas usually if it's a demon, it has no control. And that's the reason the shaking hand thing is so important, because if it can't control itself, then it's going to try to get control of whatever it can, i.e.
Exactly.
Right? And that's way easier than you think it might be.
Right. And that actually does remind me of something. Two things, actually. One, an experience I had with something like that. But so one thing I was told is that most demons, especially like lower level ones, if they gain possession of a body, you're going to be able to tell because they aren't going to be moving like a normal person does. It's going to be like they aren't used to being in this body, and it's going to be very strange and stand out. And they told me it's like they could tell, and they cast the thing out, and then after the thing disappeared, it was back to normal. The person had no memory of acting like that whatsoever, right? And it goes back to what you're saying of them not having the control. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was
okay. I couldn't hear you.
I'm sorry, I
Brendan
was
is
muted for a
like-
second. I was just looking at pictures of fat people at McDonald's and I felt bad. I didn't want to like, I wasn't trying to pick on any particular person, but just this idea, like you have to imagine if I were a demon, you know what I mean? Put yourself in a demon's shoes. First thing I would do is go out and get a human body and then eat like I would have as much existential experience as possible, right? I would eat refined sugars as fast as possible. You know what I mean? It's like there's these places that are, you know, this like we're talking about Mosiah 2 or something, like, you know, like the not like the false temples, like God doesn't reside in the false temples. Those are like the fast food temples, man. Like you go to these places and then demons can use these bodies like prostitutes to experience things that a ghost couldn't experience, you know. And so all these and you see it, like you see people that are like in and out. I see that, not necessarily the restaurant, just like the idea of a demon in and out of a person. They're like, I got this crazy need for this thing, and it's like gut biology that's connected to this idea. Like they're called to it. Mystic Mythoclass, thank you, says Chad had a similar experience. Me and my friend, also named Chad, very cool, encountered a black form in the same house where I had sleep paralysis. Well, why does it matter what color it was, Mythoclass? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, well, that is very interesting because, again, I've like talked to other people who are telling me things about sleep paralysis experiences they've had where they see the same thing. Now, that's a very key detail because you just say, oh, that was just your brain playing tricks on you, whatever. But if two people are seeing the same hallucination, that's not a hallucination, right? Like, that's something very real, and that's pretty crazy. But one experience I had, it wasn't something audible, and I had a similar experience multiple times, and it felt like for a long time, the closer I got to the truth and to God, the more I had this sort of influence. But I first really experienced it majorly and became aware of it when I was studying different scriptures. I was trying to figure out what I believed, and I was actually reading the Pearl of Great Price. The part specifically when you see the premortal existence and Satan, right? Satan in the war in heaven. And I sort of feel this, I don't know how to describe it, other than when you feel the Holy Spirit and it almost puts words into your mind, but it's from outside you. This sort of presence that was almost like saying that Satan's opinion in the Pearl of Great Price was correct, like saying, how is that fair? Why was I not chosen? Why were you not chosen? What is so special about Jehovah, essentially, right? Like this sort of very angry sort of jealousy that I quickly got rid of, but it very clearly felt like there was something there, and it's almost like it feels like something from behind you breathing on you, and it's a presence that you can feel, almost like trying to put thoughts into your mind that aren't yours. Has anyone else experienced anything like that?
No,
with sleep
not experiences that I
paralysis.
would want to share, but go ahead.
Yeah. With sleep paralysis, no. I feel like whenever I was a kid, though, I would often like close my eyes and I would feel like there was eyeballs all around my room. You know, that was a strange sensation that I would often have. And, you know, your brain, maybe it's filling in the gaps, maybe it's peeking through some sort of, you know, when you're in this calm in between sleep subconscious state, you know, that we often get into, and a lot of mystics encourage people to kind of get into a drowsy like state for them to enter into these higher worlds, and you can kind of do the astral plane travel stuff. But no, I haven't had too many sleep paralysis demons, but back to the Pearl of Great Price. If he wasn't, so he was in a state of extreme humility. He just realized that humanity was nothing, and it was such a thing that he had never supposed, right? And so he was in a state of complete humility, and that came from understanding. And then Satan appeared to him, right? And because he was at that base level of atonement with the higher vibration, he was able to discern that this being was of a lesser quality than the one that he had been exposed to before. And that's why Joseph Smith taught that we have to gain knowledge, otherwise we will be taken advantage of by those who are of a higher degree of. Go ahead.
You know, I just thought of something like to add on to what you're saying. So we've already talked about how the Book of Enoch is very clearly endowment symbolism, full of it. The Book of Moses, now that you're realizing that's also endowment symbolism. That's also because we see Moses. This is when he was on the mountain with the burning bush. That's what the book of Moses is. He goes up and he meets God, and Jesus Christ, Jehovah, transfigures him and he speaks to the Father, right? And then after that, that's when Satan appears. After he's had that endowment experience, he's open to these spiritual things. He's had the veil lifted from his eyes, and then the devil comes to try and deceive him, because that is when he is most vulnerable, like you were saying. After he's received the endowment of power is when he has both the most potential and the most vulnerability.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so that's the distinguishing part, wherever you kind of have to find that balance, because you get a lot of Christian traditions that they take this humility to an extreme, right? Or they take this confidence to an extreme and this ego to an extreme. And we've talked about it's a narrow way between the two to find the harmony that God has destined for us, because Satan is one of extremes, in my opinion. He's not looking for harmony. There's no organization to his ways. And but then again, you hear these like you were saying, where there's dragons, there's dragons. You hear these tales of machine elves and everything, and they seem to not, they're kind of like indifferent. So it's like a strange like middle class where you have these beings that are seeking to experience utilizing our body, but then you have these like gesture like entities that are like hopping in and out of you as a joke. And maybe they're of a higher knowledge, and not in a good knowledge, but just they become ambivalent to the process, or just like they have no connection to it. They have no skin in the game one way or the other. I don't know.
I think that they're the more honest thing. And there's a problem with what we think of as evil. You know, evil, the way we describe evil is such an excuse. We're like, oh, there's the devil. You know, it's Lucifer Caligari, you know, the minister of Arianism, like rebranded. It's the Phosphore Venus star rebranded. You know, this idea that it's all their fault. And not only that, it's intentional. It's like, that's not true. You know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. 9 times out of 10, the worst things that have happened that I've ever seen are not intentional. You know, like the worst conspiracy theories don't explain away the just carelessness, people not caring about each other, lacking empathy, being selfish. You know, these things are more close to the evil that I, you know, that causes more damage that I see than people like, oh, I'm gonna do something real bad. You know, like that's just such a cartoon. And so like the idea of like clockwork elves, that makes sense. Like something that's like, what am I like? Either you're for doing God's work only or not. Like if you're not, like, you know, like whatever. Like you care about whatever you care about, or you don't care about. Like it's like who cares about your agenda? Because like any clockwork elf then has its agenda, and it's all synchronicity. As opposed to, you know, this idea that it's just like, oh, I really want to destroy the world. Why would you want to destroy the world that you use for fun, right? What's the point of being evil if you're not a sustainable kind of evil? Yeah. So I see it as like they're trying to hold on to it as long as possible, but it's like inevitable that it'll turn itself into a death. It's a Death Eater world, right? Like this world that is, the consequences of doing that are eventually less life is produced, more death happens, versus the other thing, which is now chemical process, which produces more life with more creativity, with more phenomenological diversity. And these are like two obvious consequentialist paths, but it's not so much like, oh, I hate everything and I want to be evil. No, it's like they just want to play, you know, and that's not, it doesn't lead to.
Well, it kind of goes back to that like good intention thing that you were talking about earlier. Because you brought up a guy in chat a while ago. What was it? Sabatine Sebi or whatever his name was, the 1666.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right. And so he was of the opinion, or at least it was portrayed that it was of the opinion, like pretty much the more death, the more life you have. So if we create more chaos, then it'll bring about the age of more order and everything.
The closer we are to God being like, all right, that's it. I'm turning it off. I'm coming back. Every kid out of the pool. Yeah.
Oh, we have another super chat from the same guy who was talking about the sleep paralysis.
Oh, cool. Mythoclast. For $5.55, which I like these numbers. These are good. Check out Nathaniel J. Gillis' work. He's made connections to sleep paralysis and possession and abductions. Linked to incubi, succubi, super dark topic. Yeah, I think it's super relevant, though. I mean, especially in this world where more and more people are addicted to like virtual pornography. And so the idea of manifesting demons, like they don't understand. You're not just getting one, you're getting like two demons that are using you. I don't know what words I should even use to describe it because it's worse than you.
Right. Like
you could kind of trace like the usage with pornography in line with marijuana too, and so there's a lot of seems to be interesting connections between not only autism but with drug use that can lead to these certain embracings of realities that aren't seen as standard.
It's interesting. That's like a thing to consider too, because obviously DNC talks about like the words of wisdom talks about like God makes herbs for all purposes, right? And so I would think that there's a point where for instance, in Utah, it'd be great to see medical marijuana instead of opiate addiction, for instance. Like there's things like that. But it's important to remember, like, especially I just had a guy on my show today who made an anti-gravity bong. So I talk to all kinds of people. Okay. I'm just saying the idea that it's crystals, right? And they're now reducing the plant to just crystals, right? And that idea again of like crystal radio, that you're getting in your blood like frequencies that are being picked up, and eventually you're training that frequency. It's like, oh, okay, that's the frequency to go to. You're augmenting your frequency. It's finding your frequency, and then you got this handshake like password connect to a network. That's kind of how it seems to me. The more you take crystalline substances, and I mean that like pretty broadly, because when they say drug, I guess it's a Greek etymological root for dried herb. And a lot of dried herbs, people are like, oh, it's just a dried herb. It's like, it's totally fine. Like, and I think
here's something
like I'm more open-minded than 99% of people are, but I'm just telling you, it also seems like it could be used like for crystal radio resonance.
Right.
Here's
so
something.
It's like an endowment, right? It's opening up your subconscious mind to certain realities, and so whatever you're feeding into this open window into your mind, it's going to be trained like a missile guider, because that's all humans are. Is just we focus from object of attention to object of attention, and that's why having that non-dual state to have a universal perspective is required. Because if we become hyper focused on certain realities while our doors of perception are wide open, then you can let in these succubus and incubi and potentially more easy. Or you can smoke a J and you're reading philosophy and reading the Bible and you're feeling inspired and you're getting these deeper downloads that are coming from it. So I think, it might be an amplifier on, because Terence McKenna, he kind of said whenever you smoke marijuana, it just blurs the mind between your conscious and unconscious. And that's why he said why you didn't really dream whenever you smoked marijuana. You didn't really go into REM sleep as much, is because you kind of used all that energy that you had in your waking state while you were utilizing the worlds are blurring whenever you are ingesting marijuana, and so you don't get access to the dream. So you might be losing the channel by overusing the herb. And so that's why God says it's in their proportions and in their places and everything. So
plus, I just remember like in California, Santa Cruz, like in these like crazy parties, like, 'cause especially when they were trying to like legalize, right before that happened, it was like, it was very occult, like, and now comes in the goddess Cannabia, this cannabis goddess lady, and she's like delivering sacrament, essentially. And, like that metaphor, and, it just the idea that she is the succubus, it's just kind of, like, it's, I again, with like, you got to be careful is all I'm saying, because it's so easy to be like, it always starts out with, I'm going to rebel. It sounds so cliche. I know, like, I'm going to rebel, and I think this whole thing is wrong, and I'm going to do my own thing. And then all of a sudden, like, you're in a satanic ritual. I don't know. Just don't kill the babies. I'm just saying, like, stop along the way somewhere, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I would say is that you
I
definitely
love
need
your
to.
emoji of the down. Don't kill the babies down. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I got a question. Something. What are your guys' opinion? So we're talking about, okay, so once you've reached this higher level of awareness, you're more susceptible to both good and evil. You can encounter angels and demons. What is your guys' idea of the garments as what Boyd K. Packer talked about, a protection from demons? And that if you keep worthy while wearing them, they will keep you safe from possession. What are your thoughts on that?
Ooh, can we even go first?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think wearing a cross can have a similar like protection, but I think ultimately it's not based in material per se, like, oh, it's made of pure cotton or wool versus the polyester blend that they have now, and that makes a difference on whether the devils can assault you or not. I don't think so, unless there is some sort of resonance connection with wool, which I've seen some interesting interpretations of that. Um, it might be an actual, it might serve as a spiritual thing, but I think it has more to do with faith. And
Well,
so if I have a faith exercise in the cross around my neck, it could ward off the spirit, just like if I have faith in my garments and the things that they stand for, then it could also ward off certain.
yeah. Well, here's taking a step further. Are you guys familiar with the anime Hunter x Hunter?
Yes.
Briefly.
Okay, so the way Nen works, that's like the energy, the chi powers in it, is like you
Right.
set a restriction on yourself where it's like you do this and you get this power in return. So in a way, the garments, that's part of the covenants. It's part of your temple covenants. If you keep your covenants, you receive this power, and it is a symbolic thing of that, like in Hunter x Hunter, right, with the Nen, where you are putting that restriction and pledge on yourself in order to gain that endowment of power.
Yeah,
Right, so it's
it has to be power under control. You just can't have power under no
exactly,
guidance. Yeah.
exactly, and I think that more so because I know that works with the law of attraction, with manifestation, with the placebo effect, but more so when you are actually covenanting with God to do something, then the result of following that faithfully will give you that same thing where it's like you're making a deal with God. That is what a covenant is, a two-way promise that, okay, God, if I follow you and I keep these commandments and I keep my promises to you, then you will give me this. And the Lord does not break his covenants.
Yeah, I
That's
have
a
a
good. All
part.
right, your question though, like, is more okay. So, how important is the physical representation of the promise?
Well, here's what I'm thinking is like, say, using the cross as an example, right? You have a cross necklace. Let's say that this cross that you're wearing, it is symbolic, like you met with God and you made a promise with God, right? And then you wearing this cross as a symbol of keeping that covenant, think of it like this, as a physical conduit for that power. I think the same thing would work. And because it is involved, the energy of that physical object is mixed in with the covenant, it acts as a conduit for that energy.
I'm worried about certain things like that only as being like raised Catholic. I've seen so many people worship crosses specifically.
Right.
If you hadn't brought
Well,
up that,
I guess a cross is just an example.
Like, oh,
Right.
crosses. Because you've got like the cross of Cortez. He's like running. No, I'm sure it froze. He'll come back on. But you know what I mean? Like there's something to be said for idolatry. And I don't feel that same thing about the garments. You know what I mean? I don't feel like that many people are like, oh man, like I gotta wear my garments because that's why I'm gonna win the game. You know,
Yeah,
I mean, that's true. I think that that's true to an extent.
Yeah.
Like, I think it can be very helpful in weird ways. But I don't think it's like the thing I'm thinking about. I'm like, oh man, like I think it's more, and I don't know how much we're even supposed to talk about that.
Yeah.
But I think that it has a lot more to do with, like you said, about the promise or promises.
Yeah, so it's like a physical manifestation of that conduit where at conference when they were talking about the garments, I forget who was giving that talk. He literally says that removing the garments is almost like rejecting that covenant.
Yeah,
so,
it blows. But okay, I don't even know. Like, what do we talk about with Joseph Smith's death, right? Because the idea that he, wasn't in his garments at the end there, because he must have known he was going to die. Like, why else would you do that unless you're like, it's time, essentially.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Chaz is got it. What's
Got
up?
it.
We were just talking about Joseph Smith not wearing his garments on when he died, right? In the prison.
There's a lot. I was just got done kind of talking a little bit on this topic. So there was a lot of claims that Joseph Smith took off his garments because Emma Smith told him to take off his garments, and I don't see that it's hard for me because there's actually no contemporary evidence that the garments are even from Joseph Smith, but the symbols that are on the garments are ancient. They seem to be. The square and compass seem to have been associated with the gold plates even. So there seems to be a link to these symbols in the very least, to some degree. And there's garments that Jesus wore that were split up and everything. Who knows what those look like in particular. So I'm kind of ambivalent about the garments because of how different they are today compared to whenever they were. So supposedly the story is that Joseph Smith had it revealed to him.
More than the garments.
What's that?
The symbology is more important than the garment.
Right.
Like you can have.
So it was in the middle of the summer, and it was in the middle of the summer in Illinois, and supposedly one of the other guys kept his garments on, and that's why he survived or whatever. I can't really get into that topic right now, but he didn't wear them all the time. Like it wasn't that it was really hot in Illinois and he was working, and the practice of wearing them every single day is a kind of a modern thing. And I think it's useful. And I think there is a lot to be gained from the practice, but I don't put too much credence into like it making you bulletproof and, you know, some of the crazy stories that you hear, but yeah.
Yeah, that's why I think the idea of it being
Upanayana is the Hindu strap that Brahmins wear. And it, you know, you got to understand, in a culture where it's like 100 degrees all the time and they didn't have air conditioning for the first 4,000-6,000 years of it, like it makes less sense to wear full body temple garments all the time. In fact, I think we've talked about the Digambara. Is that how you spell that again? Digambara, which is the skyclad, and he's not holding an iPhone, I swear, but he is naked because this is the original state, right? And I think it's interesting talking about like Adam and Eve because these guys are trying to live their life in harmony with nature. They only eat like fruits of trees so as not to kill the tree itself. Like they're super not killy, you know.
I think there's a story with Guru Nanak, the founder of the Sikh tradition. You should look up the Sikh garments. The Sikhs do baptism and they have garments that they wear. So that's fascinating. But there was a story where he was in. That's ours.
It was funny that came up when I typed in Sikh garment.
Yeah.
Okay.
There is a special garment that they get at baptism, and they're referred to as lions. Like that's their title for once you're baptized, you become a lion. But there's a story with Guru Nanak before he founded the tradition that he was in the woods and he saw all these spiritual teachers and they were naked. It might be the same people. They were naked and they were only eating the fruits of the trees, but a lot of them were starving. And they said, this is just the natural process of life. This is the original condition of humanity. We're trying to live in harmony with the universe. And so he's like, this isn't right. This is too extreme. You know, you're letting your people starve because of your intellectual philosophizing and everything. And so he goes to the market and spends the money that he was supposed to use to buy supplies for his family business to buy all of them food. And they kind of are, I forget the exact teachings, but he ends up saying, he's like, all right, I am the universe. I'm providing your solution to feed your people. Here you go. And so then they kind of understood the message that he was laying out. So it's interesting that you brought that up.
Yeah, I think that's like there's a lot of problems going on with like classism and socioeconomic circumstances in India over the last 200 years, which have really like destroyed a lot of the, you know, traditional beliefs. But when you go back and you look, like you're saying, at these original practices, right? And Ekon Kar, it's interesting talking about the Sikhs, right? Because this idea of like the one creator that creates all creation. Ekon Kar is, there's a lot of mathematical descriptions in the titles in Sikhism, but they tie very closely in with LDS cosmogony. The idea, though, of the Upanayana is very similar, I think, to the temple garment. It's done through a ritual by fire. Like you burn a little bowl like in the room, like while you're doing the beginning of this thing. And what it signifies is that you're not going, and all the same rules. You're not going to drink, do drugs. You're not going to premarital sex. It's a vow of a priest, like what you're going to try to be a pure person that's focused on God and doing 108 gayatris a day, like which are the prayers and things like that. But there's, the exact same significance as far as I'm concerned. It just happens to be a string that goes over your shoulder. And, you'll notice, like, you might meet like an Indian programmer or something like that. And you might similarly like notice that they've got this thing and they're living their lives. So I find it to be a really similar idea. Like you're making a promise and also it's showing that you're keeping the promise, and it's tying you together every day you're keeping that promise, because yesterday and tomorrow you're a different person. But if you've tied it all together with something, then there's power in that to an extent. I think it's power in the consistency, right? And the consistency is in that you're following the divine principles instead of following your own path, which can be, fun, but it's short-sighted and often leads to like a lack of symmetry.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. What do you think, LDS memes?
LDS memes. I thought that your remarks were great. Of course, change in garments, I don't think changes the validity of the ordinance itself. I mean, through probably every ordinance and connection that God has made with his people, there's always been some kind of a physical symbolism that they make people do along with the ordinance itself. I mean, when you do baptisms in the temple, I don't think that the general authorities just like spending just, millions and millions of dollars on, various things just so that you can have a cool baptistry to perform baptisms. And I think, for example, for baptism, the symbolism of going in the water and like cleansing yourself from sin is very important, just as well as wearing your garments and everything else. So even if I don't completely understand fully why, I'm gonna keep wearing my garments always. But now I was reading chat a little bit, and I was wondering, you guys are really smart. What do you guys think of Joseph Smith and Freemasonry? Because
I think that's the coolest thing ever.
A lot
I
of
think
things really about that.
Yeah. So Freemasonry, if you follow it back far enough, a lot of people will have argued with like, oh, it's from the 1600s. It goes deeper. You find the connections to the symbolism in ancient Egypt. You find it from the Temple of Solomon, which is where a lot of like the Golden Dawn and Thelema and a lot of their stuff trace the roots, right? So we're going back to the first temple again, first temple Judaism. I think obviously there, Joseph Smith, they act like, oh, it's a big secret, it was connected to Freemasonry. No. Joseph Smith talks about the Freemasonry publicly and is like, I think that this is a corrupted, apostate form of the temple ordinances.
Just like everything else.
Yeah, right? And Joseph Smith had already come up with most of the endowment before he even encountered the Freemasonry, but specifically on the compass and square, one thing that's very intriguing is that it is found in the Chinese creation myth, right? So in the Chinese creation myth, the first man and woman are sort of co-creators with the gods in a way, and they hold you see them intertwined in that sort of kundalini sort of way with the serpent tails there. That is the first man and woman who are participating.
That DNA double helix action going on for you.
Exactly, that same spiral imagery, that same kundalini imagery. So the first man and woman, the divine masculine and feminine, are participating in the creation of humanity with the gods and participating in the creation of the earth. They're, naming the creatures and whatnot. And those compass and square, you see that on ancient Catholic art. You see it in first century Christian art. I've, debated Catholics and stuff on this, and they'll finally admit, oh, well, the Freemasons stole these symbols from us. That's why it's found on our early stuff, right?
Sweet.
So it is an ancient symbol which symbolizes both the unity of the divine masculine and feminine, symbolizes the creation, and in that Chinese creation account, symbolizes the unity of the divine masculine and feminine with the divine, with the gods in the creation of the world, which is more similar to how Joseph Smith used it than anything. What's also interesting is that in a tomb in Egypt from the 1st century Christians, I have this on my Instagram somewhere, there's actually a video where they found these garments that they were buried in. And so in the garments, they have these little rosette knots that are similar to the Masonic symbols. If you go to my reels, you can find the clip from Ward Radio about it. Yeah, scroll down a while. I'll tell you when I see it.
They had knots tied into it, you said?
Yeah, sewn into it. So it was like these stitches, 2 stitches, one on each breast, different symbols. And then one across the stomach, a slit 6 inches across the stomach, and then one on one of the legs, whichever side the endowment symbol is on. And so if you scroll down, it should be with one of the guys from Ward Radio on it, that clip. Scroll down, wait for it. Where is it? There. Okay. Middle right, up 1 at the top. Up there. That.
Yeah, let me do the screen share with audio. 1 second.
This is a knot. It's a knot, very strange little knot. That one. So this is that one. So that one. So that one.
So you see that knot that's
Remix.
like sort of a right angle.
It's a knot, a very strange little knot that appeared on the shoulder of the clothes that these people were buried in. They were buried with these knots either on the left or the right shoulder of their garments. This picture is even more interesting. It has tiny rosette knots that are. This is amazing that this is preserved so well, because they were buried in this garment. It's very hard to see what people were buried in. They were buried in this shirt that has rosettes sewn over each breast, over the right leg, and then a large 6-inch slit cut across the abdomen. There's nothing on the left leg. And so it has.
Are you kidding me?
I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding you.
What the heck?
Yeah, that one. So this is a knot.
Well, okay,
so we can go in
again, because we're talking. I mean, I think you can. It's probably chill to show something from 1830. All right.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Like, we can talk about like, the Masonic. Like, statistically, what are the odds that Joseph Smith would have these symbols in the exact same fashion and the exact same places that those early Christians wore them?
Right. And like the historical reason again for the garment again is, I mean, it was sewn into the material in the ancient prehistorical First Temple period, right? First Temple, Jewish robes. I don't know if I can show something that's an example, but you can see like the idea, obviously, is things were sewn in the design. It wasn't just like something is like stamped on it, right? So it has, again, something to do with like the mechanism of the actual, the way the textile itself is actually created with.
I have something very interesting. So I talked a little bit about the endowment symbolism about garments and Enoch on the last live stream, right? Where Margaret Barker in the Temple Theology book, she's talking, I'll summarize, about how Enoch in this scene that represents the temple rituals they would do is taken by the archangel Michael, and Michael takes away his earthly clothing and presents him with garments which represent being covered by the atonement and the resurrected body. She calls them, and I quote, garments of glory, and then Enoch becomes a newborn son of God and high priest in the temple. Now, to go back into the Apocrypha, I forget exactly what book it is, after Adam and Eve are taken out of the garden, the first thing Jehovah does is he kills an animal. Now, this is significant. It is the first death in the world after the fall. And he uses it to fashion a garment to cover them, very similarly. So we have Jehovah covering them with a garment. And legend has it that this garment was passed down from generation to generation, all the way until Joseph of Egypt. Now, modern Bible translations will translate Joseph's coat as a coat of many colors, but it can actually and is more accurately translated as a coat of many markings. So you have this first garment that was taken from the Garden of Eden to cover Adam and Eve after the fall, that is passed down to Joseph of Egypt and is the coat of many markings with markings sewn into it. And then you have in Enoch that same symbol, a garment, being used to cover them with the atonement, anoint them as a newborn son of God, and which represents the resurrected body.
Yeah, I've actually, like, it's weird when I had these thoughts a few years ago. I forget how long ago now, but about, it was like the black coat, and I was like, and I visualized it, this textured, super amazing textile. That was the thing that really mattered about it, more than this idea that it was rainbow, you know, and like all the colors mixed together, that it ended up like a black coat or black and white coat. And that we've been understanding it. And yet here we go with this idea that it's more about the actual stitching, right?
Yes. Yeah, I forget the exact source. I know Ward Radio's talked about it quite a bit. I was actually talking in the group chat with some people we know about that earlier, about how he was talking to his mom and she didn't believe that it was a coat of many markings and how it corresponded to the temple garments. But we then see these garments of markings that are in the exact same place. Like, how would Joseph Smith have gotten that right? How would he have gotten the markings on the garments right?
Well, Chad, you got to understand that they had a secret school of First Temple Judaism that was passed secretly down the Smith family line all the way, just like that garments of skin that you were talking about.
Lizard
So
people,
they were just keeping it under wraps until the time was just right.
Until Joseph Smith could pretend to get it by revelation.
Right. So yeah, Joseph Smith's dad had some involvement with Freemasonry, so he definitely had some access to the compendium of knowledge that came from there. I forget. It was like the American Rite, or there's different rites within Freemasonry. And Joseph Smith became a Freemason near the end. Sounds kind of like more so, like you were saying, the endowment steps were pretty much already laid out in the Book of Mormon. If you have eyes to see and ears to hear. But it sounds like he became a Freemason more for political and social desires, to try and get some connections to help protect the saints and everything. And that's why he was trying to institute the lodge in Nauvoo and everything. I forget who said it. I might be completely wrong, but from what I understand, one of the family members said that was one of the biggest mistakes that Joseph Smith made, was trying to make friends with the Freemasons while he was in Nauvoo. And there was some claims that some of the Freemasons were in the mob with painted faces whenever his assassination occurred and everything. And there was a claim that he had the Freemasonic cry. I don't know how reliable all that stuff is, but there were very involved Freemasons in the leadership of Joseph Smith, even though he wasn't actively involved with it too much. So you kind of have some question on, you got to be careful with secrets, man. You get a whole bunch of smart, influential people around, they start talking, and the nature of man tends to come out. So I think Freemasonry, it's just like any other institution. It's filled with good and bad people, practitioners of the right path and practitioners of the wrong path. Book of Mormon makes it kind of simple. There's but two churches. So I don't condemn Masonry overall. I think there's a lot of different schools of thought within it, but in terms of making men better and all that, it's all well and good. They seem to be becoming more public with it. I think that's probably better, but definitely beware of the people that gather in secret.
Yeah, I'm gonna be real though. Like, most of the Freemason stuff you see on like their social media, it's like boomer dads, right?
Pancake breakfast, of course. Yeah. But yeah. I mean, you got this idea also, like, General Conference was talking about all these new temples. I thought last year was a lot. There's just more and more and more. And so what's the goal here? Because it sounds like the goal is for a world where there's temples everywhere and there's people that are able to be ordained with power everywhere. And so what do you see as the future? Do you see that coming? And do you think that it's do you think that there's a potential for the same thing that happened every other time before? I mean, Freemasonry had bad eggs. The first temple ended up with bad eggs. Are we ready to open the interdimensional gateways?
I think the world's going to hell, and we're going to have to. I think that we're at a point where to survive the things that are coming, we will need the constant guide of the Holy Ghost. We will need personal revelation, and we will need to grow closer to the presence of God. And I think that the temples allow us to have a conduit and place to do that.
Well, yeah, one of the things we know too is that, when we die, it's not us going to heaven, but when Jesus will return, it's heaven that's going to come to earth. And so when you think about the construction of all the temples, you can think of it as a way of, even during the millennium, we're probably, it's going to be everywhere, and it's going to be the entire world as one, all worshiping in the temple. It's not something that stops at his return. I mean, we think of it as the house of the Lord. I think at some point it's very well literally going to serve as a house for the Lord.
Yeah, I agree. I think, well, let's just really quickly read through something. I'm going to pull up Doctrine and Covenants 109, 110, which I think, because I got to go to bed soon, I think that reading these passages was a good way to sum up this video on the temple. So in Doctrine and Covenants 109, that is the dedication of the Kirtland Temple. And in it, we, Holy Father, in the name of Jesus Christ, the Son of thy bosom, in whose name alone salvation can be administered to the children of men. Right? This isn't where, and thou hast said in the revelation given us, calling us thy friends, saying, call your solemn assembly. So as you can read through this, going through, I'm not sure the exact place, but it does speak about this house being a place where the Lord can manifest himself, right? And then, more importantly, Doctrine and Covenants 110, which is next. So in that prayer, you see that, right? That the church, this is a place where the Lord can manifest himself, that no unclean thing is permitted to enter it, that the angels have charge over it. We see all these things. Now, Doctrine and Covenants 110 is the coolest thing that has ever happened. This happened in Kirtland, Ohio, at the Kirtland Temple. The veil was taken from our minds, and the eyes of our understanding were opened. We saw the Lord standing upon the breastwork of the pulpit before us, and under his feet was paved a work of pure gold, in color like amber. His eyes were like a flame of fire. The hair on his head was white like the pure snow. His countenance shone above the brightness of the sun. His voice was as the sound of the rushing of great waters, even the voice of Jehovah, saying, I am the first and the last. I am he who liveth. I am he who is slain. I am your advocate with the Father. This is the purpose of the temples, not just for Christ, but for angels. This is a place for the divine to manifest on earth in its purest form to those who are worthy. And I do believe that it is the temple, by the power of God, is dedicated as a place that quite literally does act as sort of a dimensional portal to the veil. You can receive the endowment, and receiving the endowment opens up you more so, because we are the tabernacle of God. We are the temples of God as well. And by receiving those ordinances, we are more open to the good and the evil of the world. And it is up to us to discern those things. And I think that the call for us to spend more time in the temple and to seek a more personal relationship with Christ, to seek more personal revelation, comes from a place that the world is getting more evil. And so those of us that are ready and those of us are worthy need to be endowed with power from on high and need to seek after Christ.
And one last thing I think that's kind of interesting. Maybe you could look up this Saint Teresa Velia, interior castle. She's a Catholic mystic, and she talks about the different rooms within the mansions within this castle. And it's
my favorite. Sacred Cathedrals of the Mind, Teresa d'Avila, awesome.
Right. And so you could read that, and you could read that with the insight gained from your experiences within the temple. And you can visualize the dimensions and the symbols, and you realize that when you're entering the temple, you're symbolically entering your interior world where truth is made manifest. And so you could take the experiences and lessons gained from that are conveyed through this amplifier, this tool in the temple, and you can translate that information into your interior reality, because without that, it's of no use. You could perform all the rituals all day long. Unless it's translated into an interior reality, it's not going to make any difference in terms of your transformation or your progression on the journey towards unity. But yeah, I think she can lay out some useful tools for how we can approach our temple worship, because like Chad was saying, the temple is a consecrated space where members can unite in physicality, but it's also pointing to our ability to pray and act on behalf and in service to our members while we're dwelling in this temple in the daily life. And it needs to translate into the practical side of things as well, for sure.
Oh, you know how some people are attracted to like a celebrity woman from like the 40s or something? I'm trying to think of like Betty Page or Sophia Loren. And that's like, you're like, she's so beautiful, but that was 100 years ago, right? Well, that's how I feel about Teresa de Avila. I mean, like, right?
I can see it.
Thank you. That's all I'm saying. Okay.
No, I actually get it. No.
Dude, she one time said, like, with the way you treat your friends, oh Lord, I can see why you have so many enemies. Lady spit fire. I'm just saying. She's an interesting lady.
That's funny.
I love you guys. LDS memes. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Any closing thoughts for the session?
It doesn't have to be on Sophia Loren or Teresa de Avila.
Yeah. Well, I'm probably going to be going to bed soon too. I've got things to do tomorrow in the morning. But it was nice to be here in this podcast with you guys. Maybe I'll be able to come back again.
Definitely.
Who knows?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I appreciate, and we'll talk more. I mean, I'll think more about some philosophical questions and psychological questions that we can frame, because it is interesting. The first thing you brought up, just about, are things just placebo effect? Well, like, let's look at some of the other examples of placebo effect, or even just, regular drugs, like they give you chemical responses you don't deserve, and see how they work out. Like that'd be a fun pharmacological longitudinal study.
I don't think it's a placebo effect when me, LDS memes, and one other guy all have the same sleep paralysis demon attack us in the exact same way on the exact same night. All three of us, unrelated. The other person that was.
But I mean, it is. I don't think either. Obviously, LDS memes wasn't saying that either. But the idea that okay, like we can see how maybe thinking something good for you will have some positive responses. Right. How long does that last? Can you do that like for your life? Can you, like, every time you're not feeling well, you drink and you just feel better? Can you do that? Does that just work? These are important questions. Or do you have to, like,
is oxygen a drug? You can get high off of it, and it's like.
Yeah, okay, but do you consider that, like, if you drink like a good amount of alcohol and it gives you like a little bit of a high, and then you start to dip and then you just drink more to have more of that high, are you basically insinuating that you can kind of go on and on with always finding
I
a
don't
way
believe it. So
absolutely.
imagine that like you're like a kid from a rich family. You're Siddhartha, and you've never seen suffering before, and you're really excited about the idea of like the jungle and like violence and chaos because you heard about it on TV now. And like you go to like the ghetto and you hear a gunshot for the first time. You're like, wow, a gunshot, or even you're like shocked by it. Oh, what was that? A gunshot. Now imagine you live there, you stay there a day, and you stay there another week, and you stay there a year, and then eventually it's like there's that gunshot again until you like ignore it or you become it. That's kind of the problem with the idea that you can just have these, that like the idea of a perpetual moment. You can't have a perpetual moment that way, right? This is kind of the thing I think that's interesting about the garment. Like you can tie together a perpetual moment that way, but alcoholism, like talk to alcoholics and like lifetime alcoholics, they'll tell you about how it changed. And it's almost always the same VH1 special. It was like awesome. It was less awesome. I chased it. I started suffering. Couldn't get out of it. So that way for anytime you have a chemical response, even if it was just completely like you're a Buddhist monk and you're like, oh, I don't need to even like listen to my body anymore because it's all just material. So I'll just ignore it and I'll turn on the senses of feeling, fed. Well, what happens? Well, eventually, like, they starve to death.
Yeah. Well, what happens whenever the Catholics, we're talking about the placebo, they believe that the bread and the wine are literal body and blood of Christ, and they have a whole adoration process surrounding this, and they're imagining and believing with their ultimate faith that this is actually the body and blood of Christ.
Manifestation.
Right, and so they take it and they feel this satiation that occurs within them. So whether you believe all the context and surrounding information that they put around it, I do think there is something to the real presence. I do think there is worth in approaching the sacrament as if it was the actual body and blood of Christ. The only thing that will satiate that craving that we have will be the infinite, because that's what we desire. And so whenever we're taking these drugs, drinking alcohol or whatever, it's to fill the flow state. But the question is, what are we flowing with? And so the only way for you to be continually and enduringly satisfied with being addicted to something is to be addicted to the good, the true, and the beautiful.
Well,
approaching on 2 hours here, so just wondering if that was kind of the time when you wanted to kind of sever the ties and call it a night. But
yep, that's kind of that's my plan. I just wanted to make sure everyone knows they can go to Instagram, check out Latter Day Chad's Instagram, and we'll do this again probably next week sometime. Oh, and Chad and I are going to do a show. What's our plan, Chad?
So probably the end of the month, we're going to have Dave Butler, the author of Plain and Precious Things, actually come on, and we're going to discuss First Temple Judaism in regards to the Book of Mormon with him.
Oh, wow.
I know, I was really chill about it, but it's actually pretty sweet.
Yeah, hopefully, like, the plan is, like, for us three to go on and do it, and he's going to do most of the talking, obviously, sort of like an interview, just to get as much information as he can, because I think it was you that suggested I talk about that stuff, and I was like, okay, I need to read a few more books before I'm ready to really go in depth. But there's an opportunity to actually have someone who's like one of the experts on this come on and give his opinion. So I think it'll be a great thing.
Than someone who's researching it, asking the questions to the expert for the. I mean, this is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm just spending all my time researching this. How many books do I have on this now? 1, 2. I have another one coming. I have a second book coming that I've read bits and pieces of yet, but I'm not going to. It's coming tomorrow, so I'm going to read that. I've got this. I've got this. I've got all these books.
Do you travel around with your books?
Not all the time, though. I did have temple mysticism on me when I ran into the Stick of Joseph at the Columbus, Ohio temple the other day. And it's funny because literally I was talking about that stuff, and then this guy who just interviewed him comes on and sees me there with this Margaret Barker book going to watch the eclipse.
That's so crazy. I mean, synchronicities, man. That's pretty awesome. Well, all right, man. It was awesome. Thank you, guys. We'll see you soon. We're going to set up this awesome show, and there's going to be more to come. So take care, and God bless you all.